I'm going to start just by introducing myself a little bit and the title. First, the introduction of the title. I was approached and asked to talk about that Finnish thing, because everybody wants to know about that Finnish thing, and equality. And, well, people often want to talk about that Finnish thing. They usually don't say Finnish thing and that equality. There's a Finnish thing and that high achievement level, Finnish thing and that PISA result. So the connection was a new one for me. And exactly how they were intended to be connected wasn't made clear. So I'm going to make a connection because I think there's a very significant connection. But it is unusual, actually, to be talking about the Finnish education system and equity. The second thing I'm going to say is that the title I was given was Equality in Public Education, but I'm actually going to talk about equity in public education. And they're not the same thing, and I'll leave the difference to reveal itself as we get closer to the end. But I don't think equality is the issue, equity is the issue. Now, as to me, I was an educator in Richmond for 37 years, and for the last 6 years I was a superintendent. I retired from that, but as with everyone else these days, retirement doesn't mean you stop working, it just means you change your place of work and start to draw your pension, which is an unbelievable benefit. I just can't believe how lucky I am to be able to have a pension that gives me the comfort of financial security and then the opportunity of what I hope is the next third of my life to explore and participate and acquire and learn and grow. And it doesn't have to be done out of sort of imperative of employment. And it's just an unbelievable gift that I honestly didn't anticipate in my working life. I just had my head down in the furrow, trying to get to Monday, trying to get to Friday, to the end of the year, to the next year, and then all of a sudden have all of that taken off of you and be afforded the opportunity to continue to be engaged and alert and learning and contributing, but all of the pressure is taken off of you is something that I celebrate every day. So one of the things that I do with that opportunity is consulting work with school districts and so on whatever topic comes up. And when you've got a fair degree of past experience and the opportunity of time to acquire, I find that you can turn your hand to a lot of things in ways that hopefully are helpful, and this is one of them. Because, in fact, I don't present myself as an expert on either Finnish education or equity, although I have experience in both. My experience in Finland is that I did my doctorate at the University of Tampere, actually in Hämeenlinna, which is where the Center for Vocational Education is. And that happened not by my seeking it out, it sought me out. And as a consequence of meeting some professors here who were on sabbatical from that university, and they're working with them on some books they were doing in English, they invited me to do a doctorate, which I didn't really want to do. Eventually I had to say yes because I was getting rude saying no, and I decided to come to Finland. And for 6 successive summers I spent my time in Finland and traveled around the country and sat through a lot of lectures I didn't understand in Finnish, or I never learned Finnish. And met some people and began to get to know the country a little bit. So I have some knowledge of the country, but I don't present it in depth or expert. So the topic here is to try and take some of that experience, some of my own experience, put it together, and put equity in public education into the same place. So let's just talk about, get to know the place a little bit. Finland is fairly far north, and it sits between Sweden and Russia, and its history is of alternating invasions. So it was sort of overrun by Sweden for several hundred years. In about 1800, the Russians swept in the other direction and took it over, and it operated as a duchy of Russia, somewhat independent but entirely under its control up until the time of the last century. And the Finns were kind of desperate to be independent. But in the Second World War, they weren't, although they were under control of Russia, they weren't very friendly to Russia. So at the beginning of the war, the Russians shelled one of their own villages on the border as a pretense of invasion because they wanted they just wanted to take the place over. They then invaded Finland, and the Finns fought the Russian army to a standstill after having surrendered a small amount of territory on the western edge. But it was an unhappy stalemate. Eventually, when Germany became engaged with Russia, the Finns welcomed the Germans in as an assistance to free them from Russia. And so the continuation war, as they call it, was fought. And then when the Second World War came to an end, Finland was considered to be a part of the Axis and was duly punished. They had to pay $300 million in reparations to Russia, and young men at the age of 18 had to go to Russia and work, basically as slaves, as laborers, as a part of the reparations for a period of, I remember, 6 or 8 years. It was a very punishing imposition. And after the World War, Finland was essentially under the control of Russia. Though not officially behind the curtain, it was completely under the thumb. And they were told, your job is to give us heavy industry, and our job is to give you oil, and that's the agreement, take it or leave it. So most of their production and all of their attention was focused to Russia. Now, when the wall came down and the USSR fell apart as an empire, Finland suddenly went broke. One day, they literally turned off the oil tap, and the entire economy had nothing to do and nowhere to go. They made a 180-degree turn towards Europe and said, what shall we do now? There was 30% unemployment for a number of years. They reinvented themselves as an international nation. And now in Finland, if you want to graduate from university, you must take a year study outside of Finland. Everybody in Finland speaks at least 3 languages. Most people speak 4, 5, or 6. It's officially bilingual, Swedish and Finnish, but you have to study another language beyond that, even in elementary, and by the time you get to secondary, most people are studying 2 others. And by virtue of their international experience, most of the Finns I met say, well, my Italian's not very good. My French is a little weak. I really can't speak English, they would say to you in English, and so on and so forth. So they became a very international nation and a very successful one, kind of the Japan of Europe in some kinds of ways. So we just zoom in on the country, get to know it. As we've all heard, Helsinki, which is the capital down there in the south. Now, Finland's not a very big place. It's got about 5 million people. It's approximately the same size as the Yukon, and it's situated geographically at the same latitude as the Yukon. However, it's much warmer than the Yukon because it's on the Baltic. It doesn't get very cold there, actually. 10 below 0 is kind of the average extreme temperature in the winter. But it's a long winter, and the snow, although there isn't much of it, they don't get much snow, it lasts for a long time. And so in the middle, there's only 4 hours of sunlight in the middle of the day in Helsinki, and you get these long, dark winters, which I think has something to do with the development of the Finnish psyche. Finns are withdrawn. They're not exuberant people. They tell a joke about themselves. They say, you know, how can you tell an outgoing Finn? The answer is, that's the one who looks at your shoes when they're talking to you. It's, the nation is officially Lutheran. And they tell, you know, you should never tell a Finn a joke on Saturday. Why is that? Because it interrupts the church service. The interpretation is it takes them so long to get the joke that they laugh on Sunday morning. That's how they explain it. So they show that northern sort of reserve and a lot of time in the sauna in the middle of winter. Helsinki, I actually had notes on here, but I've lost them. So the population, it's not very big. It's not the size of Vancouver, for example. But it's an international center. There's often the UN meets there. It's a lovely city, and so on and so forth. Here's Tampere, which is in the middle. Tampere was a mill town started by a Scot because there's good hydroelectric power between 2 dams. But it's now an electronics center. It has a world-renowned University of Tampere is famous for its medical research. It's a very well-known and respected university. Down here in Turku, they have shipbuilding. They built the world's largest cruise ship in Turku. So there's a lot of heavy industry in Finland, even though it's a small place. Up here in Oulu, the main thing is forestry and mining. There's a lot of forestry in Finland, quite a bit of mining. You can tell just by looking at it, it's like the Canadian Shield, right? A big rock that got scraped by glaciers. So there's lots of mineral and forestry activity. Uvascula, in the middle here, has, after CERN, the largest cyclotron in Europe. It's an international center for excellence in nuclear research. And it's a university town, one of those towns, about 40% of the people there are students. And to give you an idea, Uvascula is a typical large city in Finland. Its population is about 80,000. So Finland's only got 5 million people. Aside from Helsinki and Espoo, which is right next to Espoo, is the head of Nokia. Large town there would be 80,000, 100,000, 60,000. Most places are 25,000, 15,000. They're little towns spread over a wide area. And if you look at, when you travel there, it looks like the foothills of Alberta. The terrain, the foliage is very reminiscent of Calgary, where I was raised. On the west side, not the east side. It doesn't get flat like the prairie. It's kind of rolling and low brush, that kind of thing. Lahti is about 100,000. Lahti is actually it's a little under 100,000. It's a very typical large Finnish town. It has 3 universities in that population. It has a Philharmonic Orchestra. It has 4 different museums. It's a vibrant cultural place in a relatively small population. Almost every town in Finland has its own Philharmonic Orchestra. And most Finns play an instrument. Why is that? I don't know. But culturally, this is a very vibrant place. I was struck by the fact that everywhere I went, there were Philharmonic orchestras, even in small towns. Lahti has an interesting hall they built, which they say has the best acoustics in Europe. It's built entirely of wood inside a glass cube. So the glass cube provides the protection from the elements, and the wood provides the resonance that gives them the sound quality that they want. Lahti has I'll talk about government a little bit, and I'm going to come back and tell you about the government in Lahti because I had an opportunity to attend one of their council sessions. This is a small town, but I only pointed out because it's where Santa Claus lives. And the Finns lay claim to Santa Claus and make a big deal out of this. It's a big tourist destination, especially Japanese tourists love to go there. It's right on the Arctic Circle. You get to experience 24 hours of darkness. You get to visit Santa. There's snow. You can ski. What more could a person want? So they have a large tourism industry in that location. Now, this is the southern part is really the part where the action happens. And this little tiny dot here is the village of Nokia. Nokia, we all heard of, but Nokia, the industry here was originally a small company that was in forestry, and it merged with another mining company and a third company that was making rubber boots and inflatable boats for the Russian army. And that company was called Nokia. After they turned off the tap and the place went broke, and they had to reinvent themselves, Nokia had begun to develop walkie-talkies and small radios for the Russian army. So they had some electronics experience, and they decided electronics was the way to go. And thus Nokia was born. Now, that's still a small village. It's only got a population of, I think, 6,000 or 7,000. But Nokia is now an Espoo, and they have a significant part of the GDP of the country at this point, although shipbuilding, mining, forestry, medical research, they do everything. It's a very diverse country. So, governance in Finland, everybody wants to know that. It's socialist or something, isn't it? Finland is a member of the European Union and the Eurozone, so that they use the euro, unlike Sweden and Denmark, which joined the European Union but refused to join the currency, and Norway, which wouldn't join anything, right? So Finland is a part of Europe in a very real sense. It's a democratic republic. It's like the United States, only it has a unicameral parliament. So they elect the president every 6 years, and they elect the unicameral parliament every 4 years. And the unicameral parliament, from amongst its own members, elects the prime minister. Okay? It's a representative multi-party system. They've got 15 or 20 parties, but at least 3 of them that are very strong, and it's proportional representation. So you always have a coalition. The current coalition has about 6 parties in it, and one of those parties is the True Finn Party. It's an interesting thing. It's a kind of a right-wing backlash party, such as we're finding in Europe in a variety of places. But it's a funny Finnish version thereof. They're really skeptical about immigrants, and they really are socially conservative on issues of sexuality and stem cells and stuff like that. But they believe in a strong social network and support system. They're socialist in that sense, and so they're kind of a hybrid. But it's a very nationalistic party, and they're Eurosceptics. Right? You find the same things happening in other parts of Europe. So they've got the whole spectrum of things happening there. But in general, it's an extremely communal place. The federal government has very limited powers. There are 336 separate municipalities in Finland, and those municipalities each provide about 2/3 of the social services. Right? So the municipality is the center of action. The federal government does like defense and things that have international trade, kind of like they're supposed to do here. But the municipalities do education, they do health, they do all that kind of stuff. And it has a very active democratic tradition at the local level. I mentioned Lahti. So I attended a council session in Lahti. Remember that I think there's 80 to 100,000 people. It's not very big. There are 50 people on the council, representing at least a dozen different parties as such. And there's everything there. The Communist Party, interestingly, in Finland, is not represented in Parliament because they can't get enough votes to be represented. The Social Democratic Party is one of the three major ones. And they have every stripe and variety of party you can imagine. So if you get enough votes, you get some representation. From amongst the 50 people on the council, they elect an executive council of 7 and a mayor from amongst their own members. So the mayor doesn't get separately elected. The council, based on his proportional representation, picks the mayor. And when they have a council meeting, there's all 50 people there, and everything has to come back to the council to get. So it's a great big circular town hall experience. And interesting, I couldn't understand the word you're saying first. Lots of gesticulation and talk. Because it's an interesting place, education is free there. That's why I did my doctorate there. So if people want to know about the taxation is kind of interesting. The federal income tax is a progressive tax. The more you make, the more you pay. It's 0 to 30% maximum. But then there's a 2% sort of health surcharge. And then the difference, because that's kind of like Canada, right? But the difference is that corporate tax is 26, capital gains is 26, dividends are 26, and VAT is 23. Now, that's very European. VAT is very high across all of Europe. Except VAT is only 13% on medicines and textbooks and a couple of things. But in general, this is how they get the higher level of taxation. They hit it through the VAT, the dividends, and the capital and the corporate taxation. It's not through value add GST, HST. That's their HST. Municipal is a flat tax, interesting. 20% is completely flat. And there is a church tax. The Lutheran Church gets some money. And I don't know what they do with it, and I don't know why they get it, but it's interesting. There is a church tax. So that's quite comparable to us, I think, in many ways, except for the higher rate of taxation in the middle there. And they need a higher rate of taxation because they're providing a whole lot more services. But it's not as far out of whack as you might think. If you look at tax revenue as a percent of gross domestic product, this is the United States, which, you know, prides itself on not having any government. And then Canada, you know, we're a little more. And here's Finland up here. It's higher, all right, but you notice it's lower than Denmark, Sweden, Belgium. It's about the same as France and Norway and Hungary. It's kind of in the European middle, right? However, there's an extremely high level of services for the community. As I said, it's a very communal place. And most people are living in a relatively small environment, a relatively small town or city with a discernible city center and a city council, and they probably know a lot of the members of the city council. It's kind of like the difference between going to a high school in Taiwan with 7,000 kids and a high school in Hope with, you know, 250. It's small, communal, fairly intimate sort of country. Education in Finland, just to roughly go over the top, there is a federal ministry of education and there is a national curriculum, but education is operated by those 336 municipalities. Some of those municipalities have a total population under 2,000, but they tend to gather together in regions and share services. So while they're distinct as a legal entity, operationally they tend to cluster together in regions and do regional kinds of services. Schools and universities are all operated by the municipalities, as are the hospitals. The compulsory age of attendance is 7 to 16. So they don't start school till later. The age of compulsory education ends earlier, and they have fewer hours of instruction in between than we do. Yet they have higher achievement. We'll look at why that might be in a little bit. After age 16, although compulsory education is over, there is a very strong vocational/polytechnic strand as well as university strand. So at age 16, you either go to the Lukio, which is kind of like the, what are the Brits called? Grammar school, or you go to vocational polytechnic. But in Finland, vocational polytechnic isn't like unfortunate for your son or daughter they didn't get into Lukio. It isn't viewed that way at all. And you can go back and forth between these streams all the way up to doctorate. So if you're an engineer, you go to vocational technical, right? And in Finland, the word ammatti means profession, vocation, employment. They don't distinguish. So I did my doctorate at the Center for Vocational Education in Hämeenlinna, which is where the engineers were and the teachers were, because that's a vocation, right? So you go to vocational education. But if you wanted to be a pipe fitter, and you were going to higher level training, you would also be working through that if you were in a skilled trade. So the sort of ranking of status that we tend to observe here is much diminished in Finland. Not absent, it's much diminished. And in the middle 90s, they began to put together this much more robust polytechnic vocational university system with cross-linkages. So one of the profs that I worked for example, as a young man, had to leave home as soon as he finished school in order to be employed, and he lived with 3 other young men as an apprentice far away from his home, and he learned to be a machinist, and after a while he decided he should go back to school. He went back and he eventually got a degree in engineering, then he went sideways, then he got a doctorate in education, and then he's now the municipal manager of the province of Hamina, which is right in the middle of Finland. Everything in education is free in Finland, right through PhD and adult education. They have a very strong adult education program. You can go and learn how to make felt hats or repair your car or do drafting or just about anything you want. It's all free. And in fact, you get a salary if you're in school. I didn't get a salary because I was a foreigner, but everything was free. They don't even have a registrar's office. They wouldn't know how to take money from you if you tried to give it to them. There is subsidized food right from kindergarten. They don't have kindergarten. Right from the first year of schooling through university. So every school has a cafeteria with subsidized food in it, which you have to pay for, but it's inexpensive. And the salary that you're given as a student is intended to allow you to devote yourself to your studies so you're not distracted by having to have a job that takes you away from what you're supposed to be doing, which is learning things. That is the same in Sweden, it's the same in Norway, it's the same in Denmark. It's a Nordic thing. But it's a distinctly different thing. So let's just take a little quick glimpse into the educational system in Finland.
Hyvää huomenta.
On the outskirts of Helsinki, the Ranias are getting ready for school. Urmas and Tina have 4 children. 3 of this hungry bunch are all educated at their local state school. For the girls, it's a short walk away. Toporanimäki Comprehensive is a secondary and primary school rolled into one. The first lesson about school in Finland is relax. Take your shoes off when you arrive. And when you get into the classroom, call your teachers by their first name.
45 ja laske tätä kohtaa.
This is Mariana, and because her pupils stay at the same school for so many years, she's been their teacher for most of their school life.
I'm like growing up with my children, my students. And I see the problems what they probably have when they are small, when they come to school. And now, after 5 years, I still know and I still see what has happened in their youth. What is the best things what they can do? I tell them that I'm their school mother.
Le café, le salon de thé, le salon de thé.
Learning foreign languages here is seen as key. For these 11-year-olds, French is not their second, but their third language. And when they're 13, some will speak a fourth. But in Finland, success is not measured by winners and losers. Learning is more like a team game. The best and worst pupils in any subject are taught together. Controversial, maybe, but something they say works.
It's very important to have everyone in the same class, but of course that creates a problem every now and then, because there are some that are really, for instance in English, they're fluent in English, they're very good, and then there are some that need special attention, but of course we try to give that to them.
Giving pupils extra help is standard practice. In this class there are 3 teachers. Anna and Sunny teach a double lesson. Marvi just works with those who struggle. And it's the teachers here that would make any education secretary go green with envy. they're the key ingredient. Why, in a subject like science, the Finns score so high. Teachers all have to complete a master's degree. Trust is important here. In PE, the kids head off unaccompanied for a long cross-country ski. And their effortless ease in achieving quality education is shown off by one statistic. Children here do the least number of class hours per week in the developed world and get the best results. What is the secret of Finland's education success? The head teacher gives his teachers much of the credit, but another reason is the T word again, trust, this time in him.
Nobody outside is saying that you have to do like this or like that. And the feeling is that they trust us. This is my school, it's not the politicians' schools.
In countries like the UK and the US, education is built around the idea of competition. Some schools will succeed and some won't. Incredibly though, the results at this school in Helsinki are virtually the same as any other school in Finland. And that means there's no such thing as a failing Finnish school. Finland's success has kick-started a kind of education tourism. More than 100 foreign delegations visited last year. But the woman in charge admits there's still room for improvement.
The Finnish system, it supports very much those pupils who has learning difficulties, but we have to pay more attention also for those pupils who are very talented. And now we have started a pilot project about it also, that how to support those pupils who are very gifted in some areas.
We called on one of the country's biggest success stories. What do Finnish businesses want for the future? For the Finnish mobile phone giant, it's about maintaining high standards in the core subjects and consistency across the workforce.
What we want the education system in Finland to continue doing is to keep a very good level in mathematics, science and technology-related subjects. Being in a classroom with less talented people, it makes you, as a talented pupil, able to teach the other ones, to work in a group with different kind of people and to accept diversity.
So back to the Ranias and the youngest in their family. Otto is 6, and like all children in Finland, he won't start at proper school until he's 7. The thinking that by then he'll be itching to start classes, but in the meantime, it's lessons with Mum at home. How was your day at school today then?
I really like the textiles class.
Like Tina's spaghetti bolognese, Finland's success is part homemade.
It's very interesting to hear what they've done.
They have a culture here of valuing education, and parents know they have a key role to play too.
There's sort of a triangle, if you can say so, that there are parents, and then there are the kids, and then there's the school and the teachers, and to have an active dialogue. The Finnish system sort of at least tries to encourage that, and I think at least in our school.
Explaining why the Finns score high isn't easy. Unlike other European countries, Finland has very little immigration. So when pupils start learning, language isn't a problem. But their system's success is built upon the idea of less can be more. When you have relaxed schools, free from politicians, where nobody gets left behind.
Hyvää yötä.
Tom Burridge, BBC News, in Helsinki.
So, does it work? The reason that people are going to Finland is because of the PISA results. PISA is the Program for International Student Assessment. It's operated by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, out of Europe, and it includes all of the European nations, North American nations, the Asia-Pacific Rim countries, Singapore, places like that. It doesn't include, as far as I know, anybody in Africa, and doesn't include much more of the rest of the Asian and South Pacific. But any developed country that you can think of is probably in there. So this is the 2009 reading results. couple of 3 years, I guess, they do a PISA study and they focus on something and they have a sort of a lower level of assessment of the other things. So 2009, the emphasis was on reading. That's the last one for which results have been published and made accessible, at least a couple of years after the assessment to get the data out. So this is the most recent one, and if we look at this, we'll see Finland. This is why people are going there, because it actually, you'll notice that at the very top, Shanghai, China. Now Shanghai, China wasn't participating when PISA started, and so Finland was absolutely at the top. And Shanghai, China is not, I think it would be fair to say, a representative sample of Chinese students. I've done a fair bit of work, not in Shanghai, but with schools that the Richmond School District puts teachers in Shenzhen. And in talking to people in Shenzhen who have toured China, they assure me that Shanghai is not a representative place, nor is Shenzhen, which is the richest city in China. So I don't think you can take that result as indicative of a national education system. Korea is right up there at the top in reading and does really well across the board, but Finland in general has been the most successful place over the longest period of time. This is Australia. You'll see Canada in the white zone, right? The white zone is the Canadian average. And the reason that Ontario is kind of not in the Canadian average is because not across all subject areas were they in the average, but you can see that they're right there in the middle. Next, of course, we have the United States, which is well down the table and always has been, and the United Kingdom, even much further down. If you look at the, there are 32 other countries the chart cuts off. There's 32 more countries below that. Right? So in terms of the participating countries, Canada does extremely well, and Finland does the best across the broad spectrum. This is science. So there's Finland again. There's Australia. They crept up into the Canadian average. Here's the United States, well down the table. And the United Kingdom did better in science than they did in reading. And here's the math results. So there's Finland. You notice Quebec did better. Australia, United States, and the United Kingdom. So that's why people are going to Finland, because it's well up at the top. And that, of course, begs the question of how do they do that? What's the secret sauce? Now, everybody has an opinion on this. And I have an opinion, maybe not even as well informed as others, but it's only an opinion, because the truth is they don't know. I was in Finland when the first PISA results came out. The Germans had a complete national breakdown. They always thought they had the best educational system, we really grand. They did terribly. And the whole place went into crisis. They had major educational overhaul as a result, and lots of accusations of finger pointing. And the Finns came out on top and they went, what? Like there must have been a mistake. And the people said, well, why did you suppose it? We don't know. We didn't even know we were doing so well. Like they just had no idea. And then everybody started coming and trying to figure it out. They, in fact, at the time that I was there, they were in their own kind of little national angst about trying to get the girls up to the boys, right? They had this gender thing happening at the time. I know the girls aren't doing quite as well, and we don't have the graduation rates in engineering that we should have, and things like that. So they were all concerned with this little issue they were trying to resolve, and all of a sudden they found out they were on top of the league tables. It completely caught them by surprise. And I still don't think they're quite sure how and why this happened. Other people have come in and told them, oh, I can see why you're doing so well. And that's really where it comes from, is people visiting saying, oh, I get it, this is why you're doing so well. So what is the secret sauce? Well, it was mentioned in there that there's a very high prestige for education. Education is highly valued in Finland because, as a small country in a hostile northern climate, it is education which they fully recognize is the way forward. This is what we must do. We have to reach out to the world, we have to be international, we have to be engaged in the world outside, and we have to have a high level of education and be creative and inventive. That's how we're going to get places. I think there may be some deeper roots to that, but that's the sort of practical root of it. I think somewhere in the Finnish character, if I were a psychologist or a Jungian or something, I might be able to go meander around and interview people and find some deeper root, but that's the instrumental root of the issue. All teachers in Finland have to have a master's degree, and only 10% of the people who apply to education are accepted. It's a highly competitive entry. Because it is considered to be an important job and a prestigious job, and it's relatively well paid, Although, you know, doctors get paid more and things. There's still a spectrum, but in the spectrum of things, teachers are considered to be really quite well paid, and more importantly, it's considered to be an honorable, prestigious job. And in the local community, if you're the local teacher, it's kind of like being the minister in a small prairie town, right? You're seen as kind of an important part of the social cog, and you raise the children, and people look up to you and respect you. And so people say, I'd like to spend my life doing that. And so a lot of people apply, and they can take the people they think are best. There's a very high level of autonomy. It was mentioned there's no standardized testing. There is a national curriculum, but basically the teacher in the local school, along with the administration and the municipal council, because the municipal council operates the school board, is given a lot of freedom to do what they want to do. There are relatively small schools, because as I mentioned, most of Finland is a relatively small community. And the schools are correspondingly relatively small, and the classes are quite small. 20 is kind of a normal class size. Now, here in Canada, 20 is a normal class size in primary, but as you get into intermediate, it tends to be 27, 28, and you get to high school, it tends to be about 28 is provincial average. So it's not hugely smaller. But if you look at the research on class size, what it will tell you is incremental improvements in class size have no effect whatsoever on student experience. It reduces teachers' workload incrementally, it doesn't do anything for the students. So you get to about 19 or so. When you get to the point where the teacher can actually behave differently, work in a more tutorial and individual manner, less lecturing, more group work, more small interactions with individuals, then you get a dramatic change. So when class size enables a change in teacher behavior, you can get improvement. So if the teacher's behavior doesn't change, it's automatically you've got 60. You get the same result as if you had 30 years of lecturing out there. So if you get to 20, which is about where they are, teachers actually can conduct themselves differently. And having been in Finnish classrooms a couple of times, there is it's like there's a partnership with the kids. It's like a great big family. And they do some lecturing and standing around in groups, you saw them at the board, but a lot of it is group work and the teacher circulating and working in smaller groups in the way that research tells us actually leads to improvements in learning. You were going to say something?
I'm giving you a 10-minute.
Oh, oh my God! Okay.
Assuming we'll have time for questions.
Well, I might just sort of stop in the middle here. So we do parental leave with home care and home care allowance. So there is very generous parental leave, and if you choose to stay home, you get a government allowance until your children are 3 years old. So there's a strong encouragement for families to have one of the parents at home with the kids, and it tends to be the wives, but the men, surprisingly often, it's more equal there than here. They have subsidized daycare, about 85% subsidy. And municipalities, by law, must provide daycare. And they must provide it in Swedish and Finnish and Sami, which is the First Nations language of the north in Lapland. And they often provide it also in Russian, because in some parts of Finland, although Finland is generally unicultural, there are some number of Russians. And also, in some parts, they provide it in, what's the language, the Romani? Yeah, they provide it in some parts in Romani as well. There's half-day preschool at age 6 if you want to go. They start school at 7. The daycare staff are also, like teachers, are of a higher level of standard education, but nobody really knows. That's the real truth. Now you can guess, and you might guess the same way that I do as to what happens here. It isn't just about the education system. It's about the way families are structured, it's the size and nature of the communities, it's about a country which has a generally communal sense to it, it's about extremely strong social services, it's about very low levels of social and income difference, right? The SES stratification is very much lower in Finland than here, and they work towards equity in all aspects of the country. I can give you a small anecdote on equity. Finland is the country that has the honor of having given the world's highest traffic fine. Now, Teemu Selanne got that fine, and he held that honor for many years, but he recently lost it. A young man in Helsinki was traveling at 80 kilometers an hour in a 40-kilometer-hour zone. The policeman pulled him over in his sports car. This gentleman happened to have inherited a large amount of money, had an annual income of approximately $7 million. So the way they calculate your fine is they take the difference in speed on one side, and they take your income on the other side, and you pay a percentage of your income. His fine was $170,000. for traveling 80 in a 40 zone in Helsinki. That is the record for traffic time. But it's an indication of the way they think, right? Why would I give a flat fine? We're trying to change your behavior, so it's a percentage of your income. So there's something much deeper than the educational system. The fact that teachers have autonomy and are given respect, and that is interesting and important, but it's part of a much bigger picture of an equitable society. Now, what I was asked to do was to kind of wander through the education system in Finland and tie it to the issue of equity and excellence. So I'm going to do that, and I'll do it quickly. So these are the PISA results for Canada in reading, or actually, this is Canada. So every dot's a kid, right? And you can see it's all over the map, right? It's like a swarm of bees. So, but if you put a regression line through the middle, the best fit of a straight line, that's the straight line. And when people talk about national results, they talk about the line. But the results are people. So if it's socioeconomic status along the bottom and reading level along the top. So if we take, this is sort of the norm, if we take well below the norm socioeconomically, you can see somebody here who's really in trouble, right? But there's somebody who's almost at the top at exactly the same SES. And similarly, if you take a very advantaged SES, what do we got here? And what do we got? So there is a general tendency, but whenever you draw one of these lines, it's very easy to accidentally fall into the trap that the average is the typical. There is no typical. Every child is an individual. So when you make generalizations about SES, you have to be really careful that you're not stereotyping everybody. But that's our line. And that line, the learning bar, has both a location and a slope. The slope is the equity, right? If it's a steep slope, then your level of social economic status has a huge effect on what's going to happen to you at school. And if it's flat, less. Finland's bar is very flat. The United States has about the steepest bar in the world, right? Because the levels of difference in inequity in that country are huge. And you can get the best education in the world and you can get just about the worst. Finland is very flat, and Canada is relatively flat. Not as flat as Finland, but far more than the United States. These are the schools in British Columbia, and the same thing can be observed. At any given level of socioeconomic status for the community, you get low and high performance, right? There is a tendency line, but you shouldn't confuse that with reality. So equity is all about raising and leveling the bar. When the provincial government reports results, they only report the average. That's the height of the bar. They don't report the levelness. But actually, the most important thing, if you really want to increase your percentage, if that's important to you, that our percentage is higher, the number of graduates is higher, leveling the bar is a much stronger strategy than raising the bar. Because that's how the average goes up. Figure out whose average isn't up there and get it up, and boom, you're at, if you just tilt the bar, you actually get a higher number quicker than if you're trying to raise the bar. So this thing about a rising tide lifts all boats, it's a nice metaphor, and in many places it's true. But in terms of a purely instrumental strategy for increasing your results, it's not as much leverage as leveling. Now, I was going to go through a sort of a little discussion about why do we care about this, other than the fact that increasing the level of equity will significantly improve the average, which makes you look better on somebody's table. Results are on the front page. And there are a variety of reasons. I mean, ethics is one of them. Ego is one of them, because we all like to say we're good, we're better, we're best, we're number one. Economics, there's this big argument about the school system drives the economy. That argument can be contested in a wide variety of ways. There's no real evidence. There's correlational evidence that in places with higher education you have higher average income, but there's no causal evidence of this, right? It's a convenient but not terribly strong argument. The real argument, as I think, is like self-interest. It's a better place for everybody when it's a more equitable place. It's a safer place, it's a healthier place, and it's a happier place. And if we're going to appeal to some reason that we want to get higher levels of equity, ethics is the foundation, but I think the argument that swings the most lead with a practically oriented audience is that everybody benefits when you have more equity. My experience with this is in Richmond, where we moved quite aggressively to an inclusive school system, starting in the late 80s, really, but all through the 90s and all through my time as superintendent. It's about a 20-year journey. And what we found in a nutshell is, the more you focus on inclusion, the higher your standards go. The higher your results go, and the better your teaching is. there are many reasons for that, but one of them is teachers simply have to be better. When you bring a broader spectrum in, I know a lot of people like say, my daughter's a teacher, she has 3 autistic kids in her class this year, she has multiple kids with behavior, all kinds of things, and the job is tough and difficult, and it takes a really talented, energetic person to do it. But the quality of teaching rises significantly when the diversity of the population goes up. Because you can't get away with weak practice. You must be on top of your game. So when we put lots of ESL kids in our classes, standards rose. Why? Because the teacher started pre-teaching vocabulary, not making any assumptions about what the kids might know from last year, checking it out and responding to the needs. They just became better at their craft. So there is an enlightened self-interest to this. Can it work? I'm not going to tell you these stories. Just briefly, I'm going to say to you that in Richmond, we started down the inclusion road for special needs about, in a serious way, 5 or 6 years before the ESL wave hit. Now, 1 year, our ESL population went from 300 to 1,000 over the summer, and nobody knew what was going to happen. Next year, it went to 2,000, and within 5 years, it was 10,000. We had 40% ESL over a 5-year period from a standing start. And you know what? It worked. A lot of people went, oh, but it worked. There was no dislocation. The kids were accepted into the school. Everybody had to work like stink and learn. It worked. And standards rose. I got a call from Der Stern at one point because the city council had passed a stupid bylaw. We wouldn't have Christmas trees because that was their concept of inclusion, is flatten the horizon, take all symbols, kind of the French approach, take all symbols out of the public space and you'll have equity. Instead of put all the symbols into the public space, we believed in additive multiculturalism. The city council decided subtractive multiculturalism was what they wanted. Anyway, predictably, people had to hit CNN back and truck up and say, okay, we'll have a menorah and a Christmas tree and everything else. Well, Der Stern called, thinking there was blood in the streets, because this hit Reuters. I got a phone call, Der Stern. Really? Yeah, really. What did you talk? Well, we read this story and we wanted to talk. We wanted to send a film crew out there and do a story about the racial unrest in your schools. I said, what? Well, we read this story, and I said, there is no racial unrest in our schools. Oh, come on, they said. There must be. I said, well, we have great diversity, and I'm sure you can find a story about somebody who was bullied or picked on from a racial point of view. You can probably find that in every country in the world, but we don't have racial unrest in our schools. The kids get along fine, thank you, for the most part. Oh, what? That can't be possibly true. Anyway, after 20 minutes of talking to the reporter, I started explaining to him the concept of multiculturalism. He was dumbfounded. He didn't know what I was talking about. He said, that is the strangest thing I ever heard. I think I'll send a crew out there and do a story on that. Now, he never came. But the point is, because we had already stretched ourselves in terms of our capacity and our acceptance and our thinking and our way of organizing around children who were demonstrably needy because they were in a wheelchair or because there was a severe mental handicap or something, we started down the inclusion road that way. And as you move further and further, your concept of inclusion gets broader and broader and deeper until it becomes diversity. Every kid is different. The classroom, if they're all born on the same day and raised on the same block, would be hugely diverse. So I have to start with the premise of vast difference and work with it, as opposed to think that's the thing that's making my day hard. Because that's not true, right? And the more you can get your head around that, your heart around that, the more it becomes natural. So now you start bringing in a bunch of kids who happen to be learning English. Well, that's just part of the issue. I change the way I teach, I group the kids differently, we get some assistants coming in. That's my job, I get on with it. As opposed to, get them out of here until they can speak enough English. They can't come to the science class until they understand the words fire and duck. Because what if there's an emergency? That kind of thing. So, once you start down this road of equity, it raises things for everybody, and it makes it better on all fronts. I'm going to skip Ontario. When we think about striving for equity, these are the types of things that probably spring to mind. You say, oh, that's where we need to go with equity, because that's the people who need the equity. And that's true. In each one of these cases, you need to have very specially targeted programs and interventions. You need to go through periods of thinking and maturing and growing and becoming more sophisticated in yourself and in your practice in order to get your head around this issue, as experienced by the children who represent it. That's true, but I think the important thing is to know most vulnerable students are not in any of these categories. Most vulnerable students come from a typical home, in a typical neighborhood, a typical result that you don't know. They're not necessarily poor, They're not First Nations. They don't have a special need. Now, in the Human Early Learning Program at UBC, this is one of the things that, I forgot his name, Dr. Whatnot, who's the head of it. Hertzman often says is, you know what? I can put these colored dots all over the province and show you places of high incidence rate for various things. But you want to find the most kids who need our help? That's not in the dots. That's the places that don't have dots, because these are high percentage, but low numbers. You take the rest of the population, lower percentage but higher numbers, you multiply, you get more vulnerable kids. So when you're looking at equity, although it's important to be aware of and to have specific responses to occurrence to these kinds of issues, where you really have to look is at this fundamental fact of a diverse set of personalities and learning styles. So that if every kid in the class was born on the same day and raised in the same block, you would expect them to have at least a 5-year spread of developmental difference at any grade level, because that's human, right? When your kids are growing up and you're reading the back of the child-rearing book and it shows average height and weight, and you get all fretty because your kid's not above average, right? You see how there's a huge spectrum of normal. And that's true of kids. So if they're in grade 5, you should expect in every grade 5 class to have a good number of kids reading at grade 3 level and a good number of kids reading at grade 7 level. That's normal. That's what teachers do, is deal with the reality of diversity. When you can get your head around diversity as the starting point for everything you do, as the natural course of events, and as being your job is to deal with diversity, then you begin to get to equity. Because I don't think equity is an add-on. I think it's the result of inclusive behaviors from the ground up. So while you have targeted programs of response that are anti-this and anti-that, I don't think anti-programs ever get you to equity. Right? The thing that gets you to equity is when you can create a culture that begins with the assumption of difference, diversity, along every conceivable spectrum, and then works with that in terms of unique people forming a community in the classroom. And I think that's probably the secret sauce in Finland. Because in a way that they don't quite articulate, that's how they live their lives. This is the assumption. We are a community, and we all live here. And we live together. And we look after each other. It's a very friendly and safe place. You can wander around Helsinki in the dead of night. You don't get frightened. Nobody carries a gun. When I was there in the middle 90s, the Hells Angels came over from Sweden. And there was an incident where somebody had a gun. I'm telling you, this was major trauma for the nation. They hadn't ever had anybody who had a gun. And this is in a country where military service is compulsory. Everybody appears in military service, and they've got a gun in the closet, right? Because they have militia. But gunplay? It doesn't happen, and it still doesn't happen, though they are being dragged into the reality that we're all in. So I think the secret sauce in Finland, from my experience, is all of the things that you hear about in general, but it's a deeper issue of the grounding assumptions upon which people are living their lives as individuals and communities. And this shapes the nature of their schools, the way they approach child rearing and neighbors and communities and schools, and that is, I think, the foundation. Now here in BC, we're just launching into the BC Education Plan. Most of you are trustees from my opening question, so you know about this. The BC Education Plan, of course, is not a plan, it's a slogan, but it's a slogan that is trying to become a plan. And the ministry has, I think in a sincere way, said we want to have a dialogue and shape this as we go, and it's greatly encumbered by the current circumstances, and so it's not making great progress. But these are the foundational issues. The one there that is important, some of those are just catchwords, some of them are American attitudes leaking north, but the one that, technology is a distraction, but personalized learning is the real issue. What does that mean? In Finland, there is personalized learning. But they wouldn't call it that because they just think that's how you do stuff. Right? Bringing meaning to that term and operationalizing it is, I think, the big challenge of the education plan. And it is the thing that will eventually, if we do it and focus on that, get us to equity. But the question is, will it work? And I apologize for not timing well enough, but now we have time for questions and comments.
Well, Star, thank you for a riveting presentation.